Hello and welcome to the 495. I'm your host, Doug Sparks, Editor-in-Chief of Merrimack Valley Magazine. Lou, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing all right today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
We were talking before about quarantine issues.
Yeah. No major quarantine issues with me still. I'm sort of, we had my daughter woke up at 2:30 2 days ago, and that was a blip. Yeah. We've been really good about getting her to sleep through the night. And that was a blip. And other than that, things are going pretty smoothly. The May-June issue is at the printers right now.
Yeah.
And that's a
How
nice
does that feel?
feeling. Yeah. It feels great, and it's an interesting issue. It's slightly shorter than usual, but because we had to pivot, that we got to relax in certain ways and do things we normally wouldn't get away with, I think. Like, for example, my letter from the editor, we had Kevin Harkins, our photographer, come and shoot me in my garage. I think I talked about this last week.
We've been seeing the garage a lot.
We've been seeing the garage, and on my personal Facebook page, I've been live streaming from the garage, and that was just kind of fun. I don't think normally we would be that informal with something like that, and it was just kind of neat, but it's also where I worked on the issue, so there's something authentic. The issue itself, there's a piece by he was a countercultural writer from the late 60s. He still writes, but his major works came out in the late 60s. A guy named Ray Mungo, who grew up in Lawrence, and he did a memoir piece for us that's fantastic. I'm really, really excited about the Ray Mungo piece, and there's some great archival photos in there, and it's just really funny. I'm really, really happy. And then the other interesting thing, I don't know if I told you this, is my dad wrote something for the magazine. Did I tell you this?
Out. Really?
Yeah, so we did this call for...
What's your dad's background? Is he a writer?
No, he's an engineer.
He's an engineer?
Yeah.
Good for him.
So we did a call for submissions about people's COVID-19 experiences, and it's supposed to be, to give you insight into my dad's personality, 100 words or less. So a couple days later, I get a submission from him.
100 words or less? That's
500 words.
Tweet. That's not
I
an
know.
article.
Well, that was the idea. We were going to have a bunch of kind of small ones.
Yep.
So he sent me something 500 words. And it was my dad. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I felt weird about it from the beginning because it's like, I didn't want people to think, oh, you're just publishing this guy because it's your dad. And then I didn't want to edit my dad's writing. Yeah. Well, but I just didn't want to be accused. So I just sent it on. I sent it on to the publisher and the creative director. I said, guys, look at this. I'm not saying anything about it. If you don't like it, we don't have to run with it. If you like it, here it is.
And you recused yourself.
And I recused myself, exactly. And then even when it went to the copy editor, I said, I'm handling this very lightly. It's my dad. If there are big issues, please have at it. Don't hold back.
Yep.
But I'm editing this pretty lightly because of the situation, and it ended up getting into the magazine. So my dad has, he's a retired or semi-retired engineer. He worked for like Wang Labs. He worked for Raytheon.
Really?
He's done some sort of interesting things in that way. But right now he's a senior caregiver. And that is this is the position of the article.
Interesting journey he's had.
Yeah, it's an interesting journey. And then he's also in this strange position where he's often looking after and taking care of seniors who are younger than he is.
Oh, yeah.
Right? In the midst of this pandemic. So I actually do think it was a good piece.
I take it your father's fairly healthy and
very robust.
Yeah.
Very robust guy and taking every precaution. So anyways, there's a lot going on in the issue, but that's kind of fun.
Brushed your hands clean and held them up and said, I'm not touching this.
Yeah, I maybe
smart.
made a few suggestions. There were certain things I just knew that needed to be changed, but in general it was pretty clean for someone who's not a professional writer. We get stuff from professional writers that wasn't this clean.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah, so it was actually easy.
I'm probably not that clean.
Well, it just depends. Yeah. It depends who the copy editor is, and it depends what you're dealing with. Like if you're dealing with statistics, there's always going to be problems.
Yep.
If you're dealing with the law, there's almost always going to be problems when it comes back from the copy editor, unless that's your specialization. People go into it thinking they can handle these things, and it's tricky. It's tricky to get all the details right and to make sure you're properly citing everything, and it's just,
sure.
it depends upon what you're anyway, maybe sometimes I will take a look at this writing of yours.
No, I don't know.
If you don't mind.
I don't know.
Are you afraid I would judge you?
Well, I'm sure you would judge me.
I don't think
kindly.
so. No, it's not that.
I'm not technically strong.
I think I'm very positive about people's writings and just try to read them with the grain.
Yeah.
When I was younger, I was very opinionated.
Yeah.
Maybe too opinionated. And it made me almost to balance myself off. I'm just much more open. It's like kids.
Yep.
Kids who do art. It's all good. You don't have to pretend. It's all just creative and wonderful and cool, right?
Yep.
And there's something about that. It's just the fact that someone sits down and writes and tries to express himself is in and of itself, worthy of praise.
Yeah.
I think sometimes.
Yeah.
Right? So you read with the grain. And, I would suspect that you have interesting things to say. And
commas are an issue.
Yeah, but commas are where people get hung up where they ought not to.
Yeah.
Because that's all style. It's somewhat arbitrary.
And I'm very conversational. My writing style is very conversational.
Nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing. Yeah. I want to read your writing sometime when you feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Speaking of writing and education in kids, our guest this week is a guy named Metric Mark McKellar. Can you hear me, Mark?
I can.
Okay. So you are a teacher at the Bartlett Community Partnership School in Lowell, correct?
I am, yes.
Okay. And right now, where do the semesters stand? What are the kids doing? What's it like educating kids right now?
It's a very different world. Our last day in the building was, ironically, Friday the 13th of March. We've transitioned to distance learning at this point, which means trying to find meaningful work the kids can actually do at home, meeting with them on a Zoom platform, and just kind of trying to ride herd over a bunch of middle school students who are basically turning themselves nocturnal, staying up all night.
Yeah. Why are they're doing that because they're watching a lot of TV or what's?
I guess a lot of them are probably playing video games. Social media is huge with them. They're always interconnected with their phones.
Yeah.
So I have my 8th grade classes. We do our Zoom meetings in the afternoon at 2:00, and I've had a bunch of kids message me that, I missed the meeting today. I didn't get up till 2:30.
Yeah, they're all becoming like New Yorkers or something. So actually, I wanted to ask you about the screen time because it's something I think about a lot personally because I have very young daughters. One is 1 year old, and then the other one is almost 3. And I really, really cut back on the screen time when this thing started because I thought it was sort of causing behavioral issues. And I'm not an expert. I just tend to think that all the screen time isn't good for kids and isn't good for their brains. Now that they're dealing with this, is it even worth it for parents to think about it? Is it even worth, is it just like we just need to survive? Or should parents actually kind of say, we have to find ways to put limits on the screen time or we're going to see problems down the road?
I really think it's survival mode for most families. And there are some students and there are some families who are really thriving in this atmosphere. And they're going out and doing things as a family and hiking and doing things, socially distant, of course. But then there are other families where they've got 3 kids at home, they've got 1 computer to share, mom and dad are working. It's just literally survival. Just get through this until the end of school and then figure it out and hope we don't do this again.
Sure. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I have just kind of this underlying level of anxiety just because of what's going on in the world right now. But I tend to adapt and just make a schedule, and I thrive on having a scheduled work day. So even though the schedule is very different from what it used to be, it's working.
Yeah, I got onto your Goodreads page, so I was able to see what you've been reading recently. And I noticed you've been reading a lot about pandemics and the history of plagues and things like that. Have you discovered anything in your reading that you found insightful or surprising?
It's interesting. The book that you referenced, I don't recall the exact title. It's about the 1918 influenza pandemic, and I did not realize this until I got to the very end of the book. President George Bush had read this book and got all cranked up, like, "Oh my God, this could happen to us." So he asked for all sorts of funding, and he got some funding to try to prepare for this. And then nobody thought this would really happen, and then it did.
Right. So, out of curiosity, if for people who don't know the Bartlett Community School, what sort of students do you have there? What's the age range? What's the demographic?
we're kind of a unique school in Lowell. We're a public school, part of Lowell Public Schools. We're not a neighborhood school. We draw from the entire city, and we're a pre-K to 8 school. We're a small school, about 450 kids. And it's really cool to have the little kids and the big kids in the building together, and to watch them interact. It's really amazing.
So does that mean you're teaching kids in that age range, or do you have a kind of group of kids who are a certain age that you're regularly dealing with?
I'm a middle school science teacher, so I teach science to 7th and 8th grade, and this year I have one section of 5th grade.
Yeah. Are there any particular challenges with teaching science remotely as opposed to other subjects?
It's hard to do all of this remotely. There's only so much new content that you can introduce. There are equity issues. I have kids who don't have internet connections. They don't have devices. They can't get onto our meetings. They can't see the stuff I post to Google Classroom. So they're picking up packets of work to do. So we're really kind of limited in our ability to move the kids forward with our standards. But we're just trying to keep them busy and engaged so their brains don't turn to complete mush.
Sure. So I kind of wanted to talk about, well, let's get into your history, because it's going to lead to like a bigger question down the road. You grew up in Rhode Island, right?
I did. Kind of all over, but mostly in Rhode Island.
Okay, so how'd you get from Rhode Island to Lowell?
My wife and I graduated from college at the same time, and our deal was, we weren't married at the time, but our deal was, whoever gets the first job, that's where we go. And we ended up in Gardner, Massachusetts. And I wasn't a teacher. I didn't become a teacher until fairly recently. I did all the other jobs. I tried them all before I discovered teaching.
Yeah, so and you were drawn particularly to science, is that correct?
I grew up in the space age. I've always been a science buff. Even long before I became a teacher, I read science books. It's just something I've always been fascinated by. So when I started thinking about how do I want to end my career, what do I really want to do, I thought teaching might be a really good choice for me, and science in particular, because I've always had that passion.
Yeah. So did you have to go back to school? How did that work in practical terms to go from whatever? I think your bio says jobs in corporate America. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you go from corporate America jobs, sort of late in your career, right, or middle career, however you want to say it, to teaching? What did you have to do?
My corporate career ended on a day when I walked into the office and they announced, your career at such and such a company is over today. We're shutting down the office. And I looked around the room at a bunch of middle-aged people, and, like the blood had drained from their faces. And I'm like, really? This may be an opportunity for me to actually do something I would enjoy doing. In the process of becoming a teacher in Massachusetts, depending on what you want to teach, there are a series of really long and difficult tests that you have to take and have to pass. And that gives you kind of a beginner's license. And then within the first 5 years, you have to go back to school and obtain a master's degree in education, which I did. So I am a licensed math and science teacher for middle school students, and I have a master's in education as well.
Yeah, so looking at your reading list, it seemed there was a lot of science in your reading list, a lot of history, and then some music. So it seems like you're a music buff too.
I'm a real person. I have wide, varying interests.
Yeah, but I'm wondering why science instead of something like history? I mean, you had a lifelong interest. It looks like you have a blog, and one of your online nicknames is Ship Guy. Like, so maybe even an interest in aviation and naval history too. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I've got this thing for ships, big steel ships.
Where does that come from?
I grew up on Navy bases. My dad was a Marine, so we grew up on or near Navy bases. I've just always loved ships. I build model ships. It's just an area of fascination for me, and I do love history. I read a lot of history, and I have this fantasy of someday teaching a course of the history of science, how science has informed what has happened in our country, and how we end up, going from here to there.
Yeah. And out of curiosity, since you're the science guy, are kids coming to you with questions about COVID-19? Are they coming to you a little bit confused, and what are you telling them?
When we were in school together, it was our topic every week on Fridays in my classes. We do current events, and that was the number one topic from probably January until the middle of March. We talked about it, formally every Friday probably, because the kids would bring it up, and then there were always questions, and things would happen in the news, and so yeah, it was a big topic of discussion.
What was the general tone with the kids? Were they anxious? Were they curious? Was it all over the place? Did you see any kind of signs of maybe even trauma or depression or any kind of more extreme reactions?
I think I'm seeing more of the anxiety now than when we were in school, because I don't think it was all that real to them. I think there were some things that were kind of eye-openers for them. Like, for several times I said, this is how you don't get the flu or, any other thing, the common cold. Don't share water bottles. Don't share your chapstick. Don't share cosmetics. All of these things. Wash your hands. Wash your hands all the time. I wash my hands 10 times a day probably. And now, I have even better reason to do that.
Sure. Are there any particular challenges for Lowell kids versus, you talked before, like, there are some families who are sort of thriving in this environment. They're going out hiking and they're getting out and they're doing things they wouldn't normally be able to do. But I can imagine for a lot of kids in an urban environment, they just don't have those. They just don't have that possibility.
No, I think it's really tough for my students, and it is a very varied lot. I have some students who, when we get back to school, I think I'm just going to lock them in a closet with a computer because they just seem to be doing great with this. But then there are other kids who are like, hey, have you had a chance to go outside at all? It was a beautiful, beautiful weekend. And no, my mother won't let me outside of the house. I can't even go for a walk. And then there's the whole economic issue as well. We have some kids who are they're going to the schools every week, every day, because they get a free lunch because we're a Title I district. It's really kind of all over the place.
Why is science education so important for kids, and what do you think of STEM?
This is just one of these things that comes up all the time. You just have to have a fundamental understanding of how the world works and how all this stuff is interconnected. Otherwise, you just end up believing ridiculous things or not having any idea how things happen. We try to make connections in school between all of our subjects, and I kind of have fun with this. Every time the kids come into my classroom, they have a little 3-minute work assignment, and sometimes, say, what's the connection between art and science? What is the connection between history and science? And for middle schoolers in particular, they tend to have things very segregated in their minds. This is math, and this is ELA, and this is art, and this is gym. And they don't see that these things are all interconnected. So sometimes breaking down those barriers is really important.
Do you find, I remember a time when I just felt like some of my teacher friends were saying that out of the blue, the students who are coming in who believed these sort of bizarre theories about science, and it became now this new obstacle because you had kids coming in literally believing in like flat Earth. Do you see that? Do you have to deal with that level of I guess pseudoscience maybe is the word?
Yeah, the flat Earth thing comes up every once in a while, and the kids are really just trying to give me a hard time.
Okay,
so that's fine. It's very easy for me to fail you on that quiz if you write that down. So be careful what you write down.
All right, good to know.
Let me follow that up though, because and I'll say this, I'll use the word so nobody else has to, or if they disagree, they don't have to either. Science in our society has been weaponized, and I think the education that goes on in school about science and the ability to critically think from a scientific basis, how are you finding that challenge in schools? Are schools doing a good job at this, or are schools in on the quote-unquote weaponization?
I'm not 100% sure what you're meaning by weaponization. We have standards that we teach, and those standards are laid out by the state, and it's just kind of the basic knowledge that you need to know to either get ready for high school or to live as a human being in an advanced society.
Yeah. Weaponization, my characterization of weaponization was about cherry-picking data. In other words, science with a narrative, as opposed to just science for the sake of science.
Yeah, I don't teach it that way, and that's not the way it ought to be taught. The whole thing about science is citing evidence and being able to reproduce results from experiments, being able to conclusively prove your hypothesis.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question. So, and this goes back a little bit to why you're doing this and why you chose science. So you left corporate America. You saw this as an opportunity. You start teaching in Lowell at some point. And then over the summers, instead of going, sailing around the Greek islands or, sitting in a hammock reading those great history books, you're also working with kids and teaching them about science. Is that true?
Yes, I have a little sideline that keeps me busy all year long.
Yeah, and so can you tell us about that?
Sure. It's a small business called Whiz Kids, and it's really all about science-themed entertainment. We do a ton of birthday parties. Actually, this season right now should be the busiest time of the year. The spring and fall are just insanely busy. We do science-themed birthday parties and school events and PTO events and scouting events and a whole bunch of things like that. And it's really just a way of keeping kids entertained, but kind of sneaking the learning in the side door.
So how has that been impacted by the pandemic?
It's not happening.
Okay.
With social distancing, we're not doing any parties or any events. And we had a ton of stuff booked, but obviously, you can't do that. It's just not safe to do it right now. So what we have done is I hear from parents all the time, and as soon as the remote learning started, it's like, geez, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to keep my kid busy. So I said, well, here's something I can do. I could put together some videos of really simple, easy, but engaging science experiments that parents can do at home with their kids. I call it Saturday morning science. And the videos are like 2-3 minutes long, and the experiments are simple, but there's really interesting science behind them. And the whole point of this is they're easy to do because you already have the stuff you need in the house. There's no need to leave the house to go get some fancy materials or science equipment. It's like baking soda and vinegar or Coke and Mentos or salt and water. Really simple stuff, but there's really good science underpinning it all.
So I want to ask you where people can find these videos, but before we even get to that, so now there's this other side of you too, right? Because you leave corporate America, you go into science, but if you're making videos and you're presenting at birthday parties, you also must feel like you maybe have an entertainer side to yourself?
There is that performance aspect to it, but there's also that with teaching too. And you kind of got to hook the kids and get them interested in what you're talking about.
Mm. Yeah, and do you feel that comes naturally to you?
Yeah, for a shy guy, surprisingly it does.
Yeah. So how do they find these videos, and how do they find your website?
Well, the website is whizkidsfun.com, and I should probably spell that. It's WHIZKIDZFUN.com.
Okay, and then the videos? Can they get them from?
They're right there on the page. Just click on videos. They're right there.
Okay, and are they videos hosted on YouTube, or are they right on your website?
They're also we do have a YouTube channel, and that's also the same spelling, Whiz Kids.
Yeah, I watched some of those this morning, and one of the things I liked about them is just the range. I guess I don't think of like gardening as having a science component, but then I watch your videos. It's like, oh, this is great. You can use potatoes as a way of talking about biology. I thought that was really cool.
Everybody loves to grow stuff. That was actually one of the favorite videos that I've done because I just happened to have some produce that was a little beyond the best fresh state. So I planted like a little tiny potato, and it's actually doing really well.
Yeah, I mean, and that's also the sort of thing that I think adults like too, because maybe you see this a little bit with remote learning. I don't know. You tell me. Parents forget a lot of their science education, or they have gaps in their own education. So sometimes going back and sort of being a part of this is good for the parents. Do you see that with your own students, or is that not so much the case?
It's funny. I see that more when I'm doing science birthday parties, because a lot of times the parents will sit around behind the kids and it's like, oh, I do remember that, but I didn't ever know why that worked. I get a lot of really kind of funny comments like that from parents at these parties.
Right. How often do you post your blog?
I have actually several blogs. I guess I write a lot. I'm just starting one for Whiz Kids. I'll probably start posting this week on that.
Do you know the website?
It'll be right on the website. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just add another page to the website there.
Okay, and then what about the other blogs?
So my personal blog, the Random Thoughts by Ship Guy, it's just like whenever I feel like pontificating. Whenever I get something to get off my chest, that's where I put it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's fun, and sometimes it's like, hey, these are all the books that I read this week. And sometimes it's like, hey, we're going to Pluto. Look at this.
Yeah, but you also, it looks like you cover some of the nautical stuff and the shipbuilding you do as well.
Yeah, I just I have a lot of interest. I've always had a lot of interest. And this is just a way that I can talk about them and share them.
Yeah. So speaking of shipbuilding, now that it looks like you're not going to be doing the birthday parties this summer, what are you going to be doing this summer? Do you know yet?
I have absolutely no idea.
Start a podcast.
I don't know. I'm going to cross that bridge when I come to it. Right now, we got 6 weeks of distance learning to get through.
Is it really 6 weeks? I've completely lost my sense of time. I almost feel like school wound down for everyone like a month ago. That's how off I am in my head.
Yeah, because you're not seeing school buses. You're not seeing kids walking around on the streets anymore. Nobody's playing Little League. It's very different. But I think our last day of school is June 12th.
Yeah. What's your hunch about what's going to happen this fall?
Oh, I think we'll probably go back in September, but one of the things that I'm going to do with my 7th and 8th grade team is make sure that we teach the kids exactly how to do this distance learning thing correctly, and make sure that we're not running around after the kids are out of school trying to figure out who's got internet, who's got a computer, and who needs to borrow one from school. I think it's likely that we could end up in this situation, from time to time going forward until the whole thing, either we get a vaccine or the virus mutates to a less destructive strain.
Sure.
So we're just going to try to be ready in case this happens again.
Yeah. So for parents of children who are listening, do you have any advice for the parents in these final weeks of school?
Just keep the kids engaged, whatever it takes to keep the kids engaged. The expectation from the Lowell School Department is these kids should be engaged in learning every single day. And that doesn't mean they're doing science every single day, but if they're doing science a couple of days a week and math 4 days a week and ELA 3 days a week and doing art a couple of days and doing the gym stuff, then they're busy, 5 days a week.
Yeah. Yeah, does this kind of remote learning have a hidden benefit? Or does it allow you to do things? In general, it seems to severely limit what you can do. But does it open up possibilities? I mean, and I know maybe with in an urban setting not so much. I just remember reading about Henry David Thoreau, the guy who wrote Walden, right? And he was an educator when he was younger, and he taught the rough equivalent of science. And he would take kids out into the woods, and he would give them problem solving to try to figure out, if you were a Native American person and you wanted to set up a camp, or if you wanted to live around here, what would you need? And the kids would say, maybe you need water. Okay, well, let's go find the water. And then he would lead them down these paths, and eventually they would start finding arrowheads, and they were able to figure out on their own. It was almost like this anthropology exercise led by the kids themselves. I'm wondering if there's anything like that. Like, are you able to pull things off because the kids are at home that you couldn't do in a traditional school setting?
Well, yes, because I have some students who they're just naturally distracted by every molecule of air in the room and, of course, their friends. And now they're isolated from those distractions, and they're absolutely thriving in this atmosphere.
Yeah,
it's been a pleasant surprise for some of these kids. It's also kind of informing the way I'm going to teach going forward, because of what I've discovered is the kids absolutely love the idea of doing projects and doing hands-on stuff that may or may not be necessarily the standard I'm teaching that week. So I may try to fold in some project days, a couple of days a month, maybe every other Friday, something like that, just for a little change of pace, and so the kids can have some self-directed choice in learning science.
Wow. Lou, do you have any questions for Metric Mark?
Yeah, Mark, we all go around our day-to-day lives looking in at other careers and other callings, and we all have our ideas of what they're like from the outside. And you had a good long look at teaching before your late onset teaching career change. What's been your most pleasant surprise about teaching, and what's been your least pleasant surprise about teaching now that you finally made the switch?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think I would say that it's not at all what I expected it to be. Going into it, I thought it would be all about the science and all about the content, and it's not. It's a lot about science and content, but it's really all about the kids. I've got about 140 students that I teach every day, and it's all about 140 individuals who all have their own things going on and their own needs and their own interests. It really is all about those 140 individual kids.
Do you find it's still about facts? Is it still about facts, or is it more about process these days?
At this point, it's more about, because you can look up almost anything on your phone in like 3 seconds. So it's not about, when was Isaac Newton born? Who cares? What's the difference? You can look it up if you need it, but why is he important? What did he do? That's much more important than, maybe the way that I learned in school, which was really just a lot of memorization and regurgitation. Now it's really more about critical thinking and putting, two things together and coming up with an answer.
Yeah, I love that. Any invocation of critical thinking is sorely needed, and I'm glad to see that that's happening. How many kids do you have? How many grandkids, if you have any grandkids?
I don't have any grandkids at all. I'm fingers crossed it'll happen for me at some point.
So how many kids?
I have 2 grown boys.
All right. I was just wondering about the background going into teaching middle school kids. So you went through the route a couple of times before you started teaching.
Yeah. Like I said, science has always been my thing, so it was always really easy for me to help them with science. And math, too. Math, has always been, kind of a strong point for me. ELA, that's more my wife's area of expertise.
Great. Well, since I wanted to talk a little bit about our guest next week, since you are a reader, I figured I'd mention it now while you're still on the air. You ever heard of the novelist David Maloney?
I have not, no.
He's going to be the guest next week, and he just put out a book called Barker House. It's a novel. It's fantastic, and it's on Bloomsbury. It's through Bloomsbury, which is the same publishing company that put out Harry Potter. So he's a local writer. It's set in the Merrimack Valley. He teaches creative writing at UMass Lowell, and he's going to be on the show next week. So I'm encouraging you and anyone listening to get over to your favorite online book retailer and pick up a copy of Barker House and maybe even read it for next week. If anybody has any questions, if they read the book and if they have questions for this guy, because he's interesting. It's set in a correctional facility, and Maloney, when he was younger, was a correctional officer. So it's an inside, he has the inside scoop on what it's like in the prison system, specifically in southern New Hampshire. So if you can get a copy of this book and you want to shoot me a question that you want me to ask David, you can send that to me at editor@mvmag.net. So Metric Mark, thank you so much for being on the show this week. I really, really appreciate it. I had a great time.
Well, thanks for having me, and I think you just sold a book.
Okay, all right. Yeah, check it out and listen next week. And, if you have any questions for David, let me know. I think, I mentioned it just because I was looking at your reading list, and I think it is something you would enjoy. It's a really fantastic debut novel.
Always looking for a good book.
Great. Okay. All right. Metric Mark, thank you so much. Lou, thank you so much.
That was fun.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Great.
There's our own music. I thought I pushed a button.
The music's coming.
Yeah, there you go.
I will see everyone next week. We'll be here with David Maloney.